So we're here today to talk with a person whose brother and I have known all our life, just about, but he didn't grow up totally in Cape Charles, but he did spend a good bit of his early years here. And so we're going to talk with him about some of that kind of thing. And then also, he's had a very interesting life since he's left Cape Charles, and now he's returned. So anyhow, it's Tom Mulvey. And Tom, I guess we could ask you first, maybe give us some idea about your early life, what you early experiences in Cape Charles, and how you ended up here, those types of things, your family, connections, and that kind of thing.
Well, my mother was born here in 1927. Well, in Nassawatuk. She was born in Nassawatuk, and then I was born in 1944. She was only 18 years old. And she married a man eventually from the north, and they settled here for a while, but then he was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot. Early on, I lived with my great-grandmother, Deena Moore, who lived on Mason Avenue. And I went to first and second grade here in Cape Charles. And then when she married my father, we moved away to Wisconsin for a couple of years. And then we also lived in Newcastle, Delaware. But as a kid here, growing up, I just loved the town. I mean, it was just full range of things that you could do. It wasn't like it is now in other places. No crime at all. We rode our bikes everywhere. Went over to Bloodfield and rode trees down, made forts and stuff like that, and we would dig for clams and oysters and have, cook them right on the beach, Our parents told us not to do it, but we did it anyway. So, and I kind of did the things that pretty much all Cape Charles kids did. I think sliding down the hump. Yeah. During, even when it wasn't snow here, we would go down on cardboard boxes or pieces of tin and jump off the tower down at Cape Charles on the jetty. That was a big thing to do. And, it seemed like there was a season for everything. I remember roller skating was big in the spring, and we would roller skate around for whatever reasons. We'd get out the roller skates and just skate around town. All the sidewalks were good enough to roller skate on. And then we would make kites in the spring sometimes. And made our own. We didn't buy them. We pretty much made our own. So we did things like that. And later on, when I was in high school, we came back here when I was in the 9th grade, and played on the football team. Of course, there were only about 20 people in the whole school but mostly everybody in school played football. It was just it was pretty much expected. Yeah. And early on, I had a great coach named Howard Harkey, and he had a big impact on my life as far as he recognized something. I don't know what it was, but he said that you're going to be a good athlete. And so I took those words pretty seriously and parlayed it into eventually an athletic scholarship in California when I was a senior, and played 4 years of football there. So Cape Charles had a real good, I guess probably my best memories are of my great-grandmother, Deena Moore, because she pretty much raised me. My mother was working, and so my earliest years, like when I was 4 and 5 years old, were with her and my great-grandfather, Rufus Moore, who worked on the railroad as a boilermaker. So those are my early years here in Cape Charles. So,
that's interesting. I didn't realize all that. I can remember you being here and that kind of thing, but I didn't realize, the part about your family connections here and that kind of thing. I know, like when we were kids, we used to go out in the woods, take our BB guns. I don't know if you ever did that kind of.
I did do it, and in fact, I was with Preston Lewis.
Yeah.
And I found out that I wasn't going to be a hunter. I actually wounded a bird. Okay, I think I killed it. I don't know, but it just made my stomach sick to my stomach. And ever since then, I've had a real aversion to hunting and things like that. Yeah. I don't care if other people do it, but I don't want to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think most of the stuff that we hunted were we shoot bottles and beer cans.
Right.
The big deal was if you had a BB rifle.
Preston, I had a pair of spurs that I wore on my cowboy boots. Remember, everybody was a cowboy in those days?
Mm-hmm.
And Preston would try to hit the spurs with his BB gun, and he hit me in the ankle a couple of times.
Yeah, Bill and I got tied up one time and the button shot off of our coat. One of the rival groups here in town kind of caught us out in the woods there. Worked us over.
It seemed like everybody had BB guns in those days, pretty much, you know.
Yeah, the big deal was if you had a BB gun that could shoot through a beer can, then that was a good
one,
gun, you know.
good power.
And if it went through both sides, that was unbelievable, you know. And there was a lot of controversy about whether a Daisy rifle or a Benjamin Pump, I think was the other one, was the best one, you know. So at least, yeah.
But I used to, where the cement plant is now, I used to love to, with my friends, we would walk all the way down to Plantation Creek and the sand hills down there, which is now, I guess, a part of a golf course.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, you know, it was adventurous, is what it was. I think that would be my thing about Cape Charles, is that it was an adventurous community because we felt we could go anywhere and we were safe. Pretty much everybody had some kind of a boat, you know, that you would get in, and we would explore the harbor and stuff like that as we got older.
Yeah.
But
no, I think you're right. I think that was one of the things Jan and I think about too, growing up here, was and how great it, you know, at the time, I guess we didn't really think about that, but looking back on it, that, you know, the freedom that we had, you know, we could get in a boat and go out riding and go jumping off the White Tower, jump the jetty there, you know, or take your BB gun and walk down to Plantation Creek in the wintertime or summertime or whenever, you know, and go down back in the woods and make a little fort and stuff like that. And those kinds of things were...
it took me a long time to jump off that tower, though.
Oh,
Some kids were doing it when they were real young. I didn't dare do it. It took me a while. I'm still afraid of heights. I'm not real good with heights and
the
stuff.
water wasn't very deep either, you know, so when you hit the water, if it was low tide, you could hurt yourself.
You could.
Well, there's some guys would jump off the top level of that thing.
Right.
Now, I never got my nerve up doing anything
No,
like that.
I didn't either.
But, and what they would do, at least somebody told me, was what their secret was. They waited until one of those ferries or the steamers came in the harbor, and then the swell that brought with it, they time it so when they jumped off, the water would be deeper because of the swell, you know, and there'd be less chance of hitting the bottom and stuff like that. So,
Sure.
yeah, but that was sort of kind of a rite of passage, I think, for a lot of kids. And some of them dove off the coal chute. I don't know if you remember, it was a coal chute.
I don't remember that. I remember reading in the book Portrait of a Town,
Yeah.
but I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Which is kind of curious because we used to go swimming all the time in the harbor. You know, we
Yeah.
would swim across the harbor and stuff like that. There were boat traffic, but
Yeah.
which it didn't seem to mind too much.
No. Did you ever go to Sandy Island any? Or?
Oh yeah,
That was
we'd
big
go over
deal.
there. Well, actually, when I was in high school, Butch Travis and Keith Bull, we would go. We were doing a lot of water skiing in those days, and we would go out there, and that's where we did most of our water skiing.
Yeah.
And you know, it was kind of neat, Sandy Island. There was all kinds of relics and stuff. Sometimes you could pick up, and so, but it's gone now, so it's been washed away.
Yeah, one time that was a military base. Over
Exactly.
there. Never believed it looking at it now, but
Right.
that was kind of a
Well,
interesting. But like you say, all that stuff laying around, you know, for kids, that was, you know, old buildings that were, you know, nothing left but foundations and stuff like that. Kind of got you wondering about all that kind of stuff.
Right.
You know, so.
my great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather from Tangier, they were watermen. They actually sailed skipjacks and dredged for oysters, and also did the clamming thing in the winter, and also the crab industry. It was before they used crab pots, and they would just scoop them up off the sandbars and stuff like that. So,
You know, I think peelers and soft crabs a lot of times, they go along the banks in these skiffs. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of them or not, but they have Smith Island skiff races here sometimes, and they're really narrow boats. And back in the day, I think they probably poled them, you know. But now they got big V8 engines in them and everything.
Right, they do.
And they race them around the harbor and all that kind of stuff.
but I'm real proud of my Chesapeake heritage, and Cape Charles is a big part of it too. As far as you know, I lived all over really as I've gotten older and gone places all over the world. but Cape Charles was always my home base. I always wanted to come back here and eventually retire in this area. So it had a real impact on me, I guess. Good memories. And
Yeah. Do you still have relatives on Tangier Island or?
not that I know of, but I'm sure there's probably some distant relatives that I'm just not aware of. I know my granddad had 3 brothers, and they all stayed on Tangier and worked with Ramford Crockett, my great-grandfather. But my grandfather, when he came back from World War I, he wanted a steady job. And as you know, working on the water is pretty iffy. You have good years and bad years. So he came down to Cape Charles, and he kind of had a falling out with his father. But he got a job on the railroad and in the ferries too. So, and that's how my family came to be here in Cape Charles.
What was his name?
Stansbury Crockett.
Stansbury Crockett. That's definitely
Definitely an English name, yeah.
Stansbury. That's
exactly.
Yeah. So.
And there's actually, that name is used a lot in our family. We had an uncle, well, a distant uncle named Asbury Crockett. I guess he was my great uncle. He actually drowned on, he was a lighthouse keeper on Tangier Sound there, where the lighthouse used to be. And they used sailboats to get back and forth to Tangier. And he would come in and check the mail every day. And one day on a brutally cold day, the sailboat sank or went over, and he died right there. So it was a pretty sad moment, according to my granddad anyway.
Yeah. There was a lighthouse off of Tangier Island, Watts Island. Was he ever, do you know what?
I do know where you're talking about. Actually, when I got interested in my family's history, I actually paddled my kayak from Anancock over to Watts Island and camped on it for a night one time, coming back from Tangier. But it was just something I wanted to do to kind of put myself in the mood of being in the Crockett clan, you know.
That's a neat story. Do you know what lighthouse would it have been? The Tangier lighthouse?
Yes, it was called the Tangier lighthouse. I just know it was in Tangier Sound.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's still there or not.
Most of those, I think, were replaced with caissons or some other type of not lighthouses. They all, I think the Coast Guard blew all of them up in the '60s or something like that.
But the idea of a waterman must be in my blood, even though I didn't, do any fishing and stuff like that, because I love the ocean. I've been a surfer and a kayaker and pretty much a sailboat man all my life, and I've always been gravitated to the water. So I think my heritage was pretty much like that.
Yeah.
Because when we moved from here, everything was on the water. And then my father got transferred to the Mojave Desert in California. And there wasn't water for miles and miles around. So it was a totally different environment, for me to be there. Also, the growing up in Cape Charles, the K through 12 school, when I got to California, I went to a big high school, and it had every possible thing that you'd want as far as recreational, swimming pool, the whole bit. My dog wants to get out. She's in there screaming. So that was a good contrast, to be able to leave here, go to California in the Mojave Desert, and live out there until I was, 23 or 24.
It was like a cultural shock when you went to the high school where the girls wore eye makeup and shaved their legs.
Yeah.
You didn't see that here.
They were all Hollywood. They were all Hollywood. It was pretty, but they were sexy too, so it was fun. But I also had a bit of a southern drawl, and I played quarterback in those days on the high school football team in California. And I can remember some of the players from the other side of the team that we were playing would kind of laugh and say, "Boy, he's from the South," And it's odd, my mother, she moved to California when she was around 38 with the family. And she never lost her Virginia or Chesapeake Bay draw, So everybody that would meet her say, "You must be from the South." Where my sisters and I, my brother and I, we don't have a southern draw it are. So
Yeah. Well, I've noticed a lot of people from the Eastern Shore, they're Canadians that use some of the same words, dug and house and out and stuff like that.
right, that book there that has all that stuff in it about the Eastern Shore dialect and stuff like
Yeah.
the guy that wrote it Shores there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, so it's definitely a distinct dialect for sure. So when you were in California there, you played football, and then you went on from there to play?
you know, I did. You know, told you about Coach Harkey.
Yeah.
I actually wanted, when I was in the 8th grade, I wanted to quit playing football because I was getting beat up by all you guys, you know. So he said, you don't want to quit. I also, you know, he was the phys ed teacher too.
Yeah.
So we would play football in phys ed and stuff like that. And he said, I don't know whether it was true or not, but he told me that I threw a football and could catch a football better than anybody on the team, and I was just in the 8th grade. So I took that to heart. And then I did wind up getting an athletic scholarship to the University of California. So that was, and played for 4 years in college too.
Really?
But I wasn't as good in college as I was in high school. No, I was mainly on the, you know, the kickoff team and the punt teams and stuff like that. So special teams.
When St. George were on all the teams.
Well, yeah.
Which was all the same team.
But it was kind of neat. Like I said, when I went to my high school in California, it was, they had everything. Whirlpool baths if you got injured, and they had a trainer who would tape your ankles every day for practice. And oh yeah, and we had chalk talks every morning, and it was just a whole different atmosphere as far as athletics. You know, the best in equipment that you could get and stuff like that. So, which was nice, you know.
When you were here, you were on a couple of teams that won the state championships and everything. And was it track or
Well, actually, your friend Sam Lewis, or
Jim Lewis,
took over the track team because Howard Harkey was a fake baseball coach. You know, he had to coach everything, and he would rather concentrate on baseball. So Jim Lewis taught me how to hurdle, and he taught me how to high jump and stuff like that. And I did win the high school championship for Group 3, which is small schools. And we went to Charlottesville, to the University of Virginia there, and I won, and I was pretty impressed with myself. but I wasn't too. Remember, we were segregated, so there weren't any real black athletes competing against them. So it's a shallow victory. But the hurdles are actually what got me, and I'm sure Jim would be proud of it because he was the first one to teach me how to do it. That was part of my athletic scholarship. Was I had to run track too, and the hurdles was the reason, you know. So.
Well, that's good to know. You know, I didn't know. Jan and I and Jim Lewis were really good friends.
Yes, we were real good friends.
Things I didn't really think a lot about in school, or even be aware of in a lot of cases. You know, that's something. I know he played football. He was a good quarterback and stuff like that.
Yeah. One night we were in the Driftwood. You know, the Driftwood, And Parker Forrest and Jim Lewis used to run back to Cape Charles after they ate their burgers, and I don't know. But I asked them if I was just an 8th grader or a 9th grader, and they were seniors at that point or whatever. They were older than me anyway. But we ran back. I ran back with them. I think they were planning on dropping me, you know, leaving me in the dust. Actually, it was reversed around. I left them in the dust. So
that's a good. Did Jerry Joyce? Were you involved in some of those athletic stuff with him?
Jerry Joyce ran the 880, which was half a mile basically, and he was second in the state for that, and first on the shore here. So, and his time was great. I looked it up in the yearbook one time, and I mean, his time was right there. He could have gotten a scholarship, had probably gone to a larger school.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm sure of it.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Well, Carl Kane had a big influence too. Even though he was coaching at Northampton,
Yeah.
he took an interest in me and said, you know, you got some talent here and you ought to use it and stuff like that. And but Coach Harkey was his main thing was I wasn't really much of a student then. I was kind of screwing off a lot, and he said, you need to get your act together in the classroom. You know, you're not going to go anywhere. You'll be lucky to get a job. So, and like I say, that man, he and I communicated all through my high school, college, and when I went to California. I kept in touch. He did very well. He went out to Arizona and coached at a big high school in Phoenix, and he won 2 state championships for football.
Wow.
So, and then I would write him letters from when Leslie and I were living out on Smith Mountain Lake, and we got together but through letters mainly. It wasn't through and phone calls. We would talk to each other on the phone.
That's interesting. I didn't know.
It's funny how certain people have a real impact on your life like that.
Was Harkey, did he end his career in Arizona, do you know? Or?
He ended his career in Arizona, and then he had a football clinic up in Michigan. He was from Michigan, went to Michigan State, and but yeah, he ended his career, and in fact, he was very successful as a coach out there. His main thing was football. And so he won 2 state championships in Arizona after he moved out there, and he just was very successful.
Yeah, that's interesting. I bet, you know, you don't follow a lot of those people. You remember when they were here, but you don't think about once they leave what they're, you know. I can think there was Lang, Hunter Lang.
Harris.
And Harris, yes.
I heard about Harris. He was a hard ass.
He was a toughie.
I heard that.
Harkey was very mild-mannered from what I remember. You know,
He was.
And,
But that's good too. But
Oh, yeah.
you know, he was a great athlete. He was, and he played for Michigan State, for God's sakes.
Oh, really?
So he couldn't have been too bad, too shabby, you know?
Yeah, I didn't realize that. So when you were in California, you said you were in the Mojave Desert there is that most of your time that you spent in California?
Right.
In school, I guess, and all.
My 3 years of high school there, in the Mojave Desert, Edwards Air Force Base. Jan's been there, and but I know every weekend, if I wasn't playing ball somewhere, I was on a surfboard going to Southern California, so there's good surfing there and stuff like that. In fact, my sisters ran into my high school coach, and they said, my brother was playing for him then, he was retiring. He said, your brother was a good football player, would have been an excellent football player if I could keep him off a surfboard. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. So when did you transition from, once you got out of high school, what was your path, your career path?
My big thing was traveling and surfing. The day I graduated from college, I went to San Francisco. My aunt was living up there at the time. Her husband was in the Navy, and she drove me to San Francisco Airport, and I bought a one-way ticket to Hawaii.
Wow!
I didn't know where I was going to live or what I was going to do for work there, but as it turned out, one of the women that I knew in college was going to the University of Hawaii, and she gave me her phone number to look her up because I told her I was going to probably go to Hawaii. And so I lived with 4 women for for a couple of months. I slept on their couch, so to speak, and then I moved to Maui on one of the other islands there in Lahaina, in the little town of Lahaina, and was a lifeguard and a bartender, pretty much. But my main thing for being there was surfing. You know, I really wanted to. I was hooked, basically. That's the first time I got on a surfboard. This is magic, man. This is where I want to do. So I stayed there for 3 years.
In Lahaina?
2.5 years in the islands, and hung out with some of the best surfers of the time there. That Laird Hamilton's father, Billy Hamilton. Laird now is probably the best big wave rider in the world right now. But I hung out with guys like that, and I remember a guy asked me one of the women asked me last night, did I take lessons? I said, no, we kind of taught each other, how to do it. That's how we learned how to swim here, wasn't it? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember taking swimming lessons or
Throw
anything
you
like
off the
that.
dock, sink or
You
swim.
just to see how far you could go out and come back. And eventually you were swimming. It really wasn't swimming. It was
Yeah, but just staying alive.
I was just surviving, basically. And my girlfriend in high school was a swimmer, and she says, "You don't know how to swim." I said, "What am I doing wrong?" She said, "Everything."
Told her it was.
Encouraged you.
So when I came back from Hawaii, I moved to Colorado and became a ski bum.
Okay.
And I got my license for ski patrol, and again tended bar and stuff like that. I wasn't ready to settle down into a career. I knew I wanted to teach, but I was more ambitious about traveling and going different places and stuff like that. That was during the late 60s and early 70s, and there were a lot of people that wanted an alternative lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so I was a part of that energy in those days that we didn't want to settle down and have mortgages and all that stuff. So eventually I wound up going to Maine, the graduate school, and Maine was that's where I should have been, and that's where I stayed for the next 50 years as far as career.
Wow.
I had a 30-year teaching career there, and I did a lot of coaching early on in my career, but eventually gave that up. Actually, I went into teaching because I wanted to coach, and actually I liked the classroom better than I did being out on the field at the courts. So I eventually gave up coaching and just was a teacher.
What'd you teach?
American history, American literature, fun stuff.
Yeah.
I said, anybody can pass this class, I said, you can't always pass algebra and geometry and physics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I said, but there's no reason for anybody in this class not to get an A, because I was mainly into how to learn instead of what to learn. I made them keep real good notebooks. That was my thing. And like I could talk for 40 minutes, lecture, and I said, you should only have about half a page of notes. It's not that hard, What did we do today? Let's process what we learned today, And they were good. I enjoyed teaching. It was once I got into it, I knew this is what I wanted to do the rest of my life. Right?
Was this at high school you're talking about?
High school, actually, junior college, my last 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
But I think, being a wise guy myself, and when I was in school, I kind of knew where their heads were most of the time.
Yeah.
We want to give them all this education, and it isn't that they don't want it; they're just not ready for it. So that's kind of the way I was as a high school student. Like I said, I was a very marginal student in high school, so I was lucky to get into college, to be honest with you.
What was it? Florence Spady told you about your.
Yeah, she says, well, you got an A in English, but you're going to get a D in algebra.
And it was a gift.
She says that's a gift because you're not even a D student. She says, the lights never went on for me in math like that. Advanced math, I was pretty good in general math, but not algebra or geometry. And
Let me ask one other thing here, Bobby. Doesn't get too far from California, but when you were living in California at Edwards Air Force Base, there was a very interesting guy that used to live close by you, and I think he was the fastest man in the world at one time, wasn't he?
Yeah, are you talking about Yeager?
Chuck Yeager broke the sound
Chuck
barrier.
Yeager.
First man.
Well,
to break the sound barrier.
Edwards Air Force Base is where the flight test center is.
Yeah.
That's where all those test pilots go and breaking. There was the X-15 when I was there, but Chuck Yeager was the one who flew the X-1 and was the first sound barrier. He was the first pilot to do that. Well, his sons were in my graduating class. Don and Rick Yeager. So I kind of grew up around him, and we would always go over to. They lived out in the garage, and the boys did, because he had 3 sisters. They had 3 sisters, and Chuck Yeager was really down to earth. He really was he was a self-made man. He wasn't. He didn't go to any academies and stuff like that. So In fact, our senior year, his contacts were so good that he had 2 Heisman Trophy winners come to our high school graduating class that year. And it was Doc Blanchard, who was a Heisman Trophy winner, and Glenn Davis, and they were at our high school, you know. And so, but it was because they knew Chuck Yeager.
Yeah.
Chuck Yeager knew them, and his influence on the Army at the time. It was the Army, it wasn't the Air Force. I ran into him years later at an Armistice Day up in Maine, and I referred to him as Colonel Yeager. I said, "You probably don't remember me, Colonel Yeager, but I used to hang out with your 2 sons." He said, "Yeah, you were at the house more than you were at your house." And he said, "By the way, I'm not a colonel anymore. I'm a general." So that was kind of neat.
Yeah, that's a good story.
Yeah.
It really is. Kind of rubbed elbows with some important people.
Yeah.
One of my great memories is a guy that I lifeguarded with for years, Ollie Gardner. He just passed away recently, but he and I bought a Volkswagen bus, put our surfboards on it, went completely through Mexico, down to Costa Rica, Belize, Guatemala, all the way to Panama, and eventually even into Colombia, until we ran out of money. And then we figured we better get back to the States, and that's when we decided to go to Colorado and become ski bums. I wasn't motivated too much, you know.
So you were surfing when you were down in South America mostly? That was your
Right,
main...
that was our main thing.
Yeah.
Plus it was for the adventure of it all.
Yeah.
You know, that was, like I say, it was the 60s, and it was a pretty loose air, you know, as far as, none of us wanted to get into
You would be an accountant or
the
something.
middle class America. We just, I don't know, we just wanted a different narrative, you know. And, I don't know what we were looking for, but actually Maine was good for that, because it was a real haven for back to the earth people and stuff like that. And that's why I think I liked it so much. I heated with wood, and my cabin, I spent the whole summer just chopping wood and stuff like that, and had a huge vegetable garden. We were trying to eat right and all that stuff. I don't anymore, but but you know, Helen Nearing, you know, I don't know if you ever heard of the Nearings, where they lived in Cape Rozier in Maine. They were they had a place there that they grew organic food, but they also they would take an hour for things like playing the fiddle and stuff like that. So that kind of literature was big in the 60s and the 70s. So I fell right into it. That's what I wanted to do. So. But going to Maine probably was one of the best things because I fell in love with the area, and I just loved it, you know. Maine, the whole state is like it's a community, you know. You can go to any town in Maine, somebody will know somebody that you know from wherever you live, you know.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
It's a lot geographically like Virginia too. You've got the Blue Ridge Mountains, and they've got the mountains in Maine, and they've got this rocky coastline, which is great for kayaking and surfing and sailing and stuff like that.
Did you know Bob Newcomb? Do you remember him?
You know, Jan's asked me that, and I don't. For some, I mean, his father was military too, wasn't it?
I think so. He was from Bar Harbor. I think from Bar Harbor, wasn't he?
I think
He was from Bahama.
Bahama. Yeah. They drop the R's on everything. The local the down east people do,
I think it might have been
which is just the opposite of what Massachusetts people do. They put a R in everything. You know?
I just saw.
Remember Kennedy used to be Cuber. You know? Remember that? So,
I just saw a little joke or something somewhere that said that if you hear anybody say they've lost their khakis, that means they can't find their pants. But if you're in Massachusetts, it means they can't start their car.
Khakis, lost their car keys.
one of the big saying up there is that people ask for directions. Say, you can't get there from here.
Well, then we have, something we haven't covered that you think is,
Well, actually, when I was in Hawaii, I had a nice experience. After I lived on Maui for a couple of years, I got into sailing. Well, I couldn't afford a boat at that time, but I saw an ad in the paper where they needed another hand. They were going to sail to Samoa. And so I sailed to Samoa with with them and spent a couple of weeks sailing through the South Pacific. And that was a real good experience. And to this day, I keep in touch with the guy that owned the boat. So
Really?
yeah. And here's a good story. Yeah, this is my best friend in college, John Gartese. We were in the same fraternity together, and everybody was afraid to get drafted in those days. That was the thing. The main thing is you wanted to avoid the draft. Most of us had deferments for student deferments, but as soon as you graduated, man, you got the notice to go down and. Well, John Gartese failed the physical. I failed the physical, so we didn't have to go in the military. You know, basically, because to me, Vietnam was a death sentence. You know, I didn't want to go at all. So Gartese got a job as a ski instructor in Germany, Garmisch, Germany, and I was living in Maine at the time, working as a lifeguard and a park ranger and anything else I could do to make money. And he ran into a friend of mine in Presque Isle, Maine, which is just a tiny little town. And he said, John was from California too, like I was. And he said, Billy talked to this guy about living in Maine. He says, and John said, oh, well, I've got a good friend of mine that lives up in Maine now. Do you know him? His name is Tom Mulvey. He was best friends with me in Maine. So it's kind of a neat how you can run into people like I did that in Vietnam. From Vietnam too, I had a lot of friends come to Hawaii on R&R that had been in Vietnam, and I would meet them in Hawaii, and we'd party until they had to go back to Vietnam. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. Wow.
But we're running out of time, boys, huh?
I was just trying to. I can't. One of the things that Jan stole my thunder earlier about this decoy there, but you said, who is that? Some of your family made that decoy, or is it just?
Oh yeah, that decoy was Stansbury. Was my great grandfather's.
Stansbury Crockett.
He was a duck hunter, and this was his original trap line, I guess they called it. I don't know much about hunting like that, but this was when I went over to Tangier the first time. The oldest woman on the island at the time was Annie Parks, and this was my first time to Tangier. I was probably 30 years old, maybe 28, 29, something like that, and I didn't know anything about my Tangier heritage. At that time I knew that Granddad was from there, but like I say, I wasn't interested earlier in life. So I went down King Street, which is Main Street on Tangier, and I was asking people about the Crockett clan. And they said a lot of them didn't know who my granddad was, but they knew the oldest lady on the island was Annie Parks. And they said, go down here at the end of the King Street and you'll meet an old woman. And sure enough, she was hanging out clothes. She had a bonnet on like they wear in Tangier, or they did wear. I don't think they do anymore. But I went there and I introduced myself and I said, my granddad's from here and his name was Stansbury Crockett. And a big smile came across her face. She says, your granddad was my cousin. We're family, she said. So that was how I got introduced to Tangier, you know. So,
that's cool. That is.
So he was a neat guy.
So that was one of his decoys?
This was his decoy. And so I was, she had it. What's her name? Katie. Yeah, Katie had it. And so she said, here, you can have this as a token of your grandfather's. So this is a real decoy. It's not, it's not like the one on my desk up there.
Yeah, the plastic stuff.
Right.
Styrofoam.
Yeah,
got a live shot in it.
And I'm going to pass this on to some of my family. My big thing now is making sure my sisters, who all grew up in California, and my brother, who was born in California.
Can you hold it up a little higher?
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's that decoy right there. But is passing this information along to them.
Yeah.
So they can pass it along. Now they've been coming to Cape Charles now for gosh, 6 or 7 years. And they come and see me every year now, so they spend time, they've fallen in love with the area. In fact, one of my sisters is looking to buy a house up in Anancock, because we also have relatives up there too, from the Crockett clan.
Yeah,
so.
I can imagine, yeah. Does that, can you authenticate, does that thing got any buckshot holes in it or anything?
Well, it must have some, I would think.
I was,
It's pretty rough, I mean, but I cherish this.
oh yeah, that is,
And I'll pass that along to one of my family.
Absolutely there.
So-
Yeah. Yeah. Now the reason I asked about the buckshot hole, I don't know if you remember Scoutmaster here at one time, Bud Taylor. He was a chairman Scoutmaster.
I don't, but I was a scout, but I wasn't here when I was at that age
Okay.
where you were scouting. I was in Wisconsin and
Yeah.
Newcastle, Delaware, and places like that. So,
Yeah. Well,
well, I loved when Dad would get transferred remote. Mom always came back to Cape Charles and would rent a house so she could be near her mother, my grandmother, and her grandfather, or my grandfather. And so I couldn't wait to get back. It's funny because we lived in different places and they were neat places, but I just always wanted to come back here.
Glad you made it.
yeah,
Yeah,
make a good addition.
so,
No, what I was gonna say about Bud Taylor, he's got a story about him. Like I say, he was a Scoutmaster chairman, and he's the nicest person you ever want to know. You know, like he and his whole family. I mean, you remember Betty Lou Taylor, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
But okay, well, Bud was her father.
oh, okay.
And like I said, had a really good sense of humor and all that kind of stuff. But he liked to duck hunt. You know, he lived
Right.
over
Wasn't
there.
her brother L.T. Taylor too?
Ray Taylor was a brother.
Okay.
And
But I remember Betty Lou.
yeah, I was trying to remember who else.
She was a grade or two ahead of me, but she was pretty
Ray and
blue
Rhoda,
eyes and
red
stuff
hair.
like that.
Yeah,
There was Rhoda.
yeah. But anyhow, Bud was out duck hunting one time with his decoys there, and he had them all set out on a point or something like that, you know, and nothing was coming along. So he said, "Dude, I'm gonna crawl all around down the."
Is she still alive, Betty Lou?
Yeah, she is. She lives up at Massaquoi Creek. It's close by.
I think I've got the wrong Betty Taylor mixed up with Betty Bradford was who I knew.
Oh, yeah.
But I also dated Betty Lou Taylor. Did she marry to Tom Collins?
Yeah, that's her.
That's her.
She's an old girlfriend.
Really? Wow.
What a minute.
Yeah, she and Tom live.
She
up
was a cute little redhead
Yeah.
With feisty.
with a figure that just was beautiful. I mean,
Yeah,
she's just as
yeah.
sweet as she could be. She was my, excuse me, my last girlfriend here.
Oh, really? That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. Yeah, that whole family, they're nice people there.
Well, I played basketball with her husband, Tom.
Yeah,
Tom
he's
Collins.
athletic.
They owned the Radium Theater, didn't they?
He did, well, he
I
worked
think
there, and
managed
he managed it, I think.
his
His father
did. Yeah,
probably.
Okay.
yeah.
And then Frank, her,
Yeah, he's around here.
Was his
He lives
brother.
out in Capeville.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're still around. But anyhow, getting back to the buckshot thing there, Bud decided that he, wasn't getting any action there, so he crawled out along the edge of the marsh and went on down further looking for duck. So when he started crawling back, he looked and he saw this duck come out past this point, and it was wiggling, and go back in and come back out and all that kind of stuff. And he snuck up on it.
you know who introduced me to you two guys was Junie.
Huh?
Junie Stiles.
Yeah.
We were playing football, and I didn't know you really that much. So, when you're 3 or 4 years difference
Yeah,
in
it
that
was
age,
forever then.
it's pretty big. Yeah, he said, well,
Junie
you got to
was-
meet these guys. And,
He was a good football
so
player.
he brought me over to your house, your cottage over there.
yeah.
And that's where I met you guys. I think it was at a pep rally or something like that.
Could have
Remember
been.
how they used to do cheerleading on
They
the
were big
Basin
on,
Avenue?
they were big on sport. Oh yeah, they used to have the night before the football game, had torches.
Right.
They'd walk down the street, the cheerleaders would stop every so often and they'd do a cheer and then they'd go on down further the street.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they'd end up out at the school ground and have a big bonfire
Right.
for the pre-game, night before rally.
Yeah.
Checkbook.
Chickalaka sis boom ba. Still remember that.
He was a cheerleader.
Every now and then I'll see one of those old cheerleaders and I'll say, "You remember Chickalaka?"
Actually, before we moved to California, my last date, I double dated with you. You probably don't remember.
Look at Ocean City.
It was we went to Ocean City.
Yeah, I think
And I had a date with Ann Hamilton Lewis. And I don't know who you had a date with.
I
Some cutie.
dated
But
a,
you guys had that old, I think a Ford.
yeah, I had a 56
Ford
Ford.
or something like that.
Had a 56 Ford,
Yeah.
blue and white. It was,
Crestliner.
yeah, it was not the high dollar one.
But Ann Lewis and I made out in the back seat while you were
And I didn't know what
driving
was going on.
back. She still live around here?
I don't know.
She does. She does. She lives out in Sheridan.
Well, I'd like to run into her.
Yeah.
Do you remember Bonnie Hickman?
Yeah, Bonnie Hickman at the reunion.
Yes, there.
It was with Donna Edgerton.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, Donna. Yeah.
We all went to lunch the next day after
Yeah.
the reunion. And yeah.
Oh, cool.
Donna, the one that I just loved was Donna though. She was like one of the guys. You know? She'd laugh at all the jokes.
Yeah, yeah.
And she was mischievous too. Me and George Ronald used to do things like everybody at 2 o'clock drop your book on the floor, you know. And she'd be the only girl that would do it, but all the other guys would. You know, so. But we've kept in touch. I phoned her on New Year's Eve. She comes over here and goes fishing in the summer sometimes.
Yeah.
So, you know, she rents a boat or you have some guide take her out.
Yeah.
So when she comes, we're gonna go out and have lunch somewhere together.
Yeah, that's
dinner.
Cool. Yeah.
And Bonnie Ray was with her
Yeah.
that day. So
Yeah.
Bonnie Ray's was like me. She would come in for a year or two. Her father would get transferred
Yeah.
somewhere else,
Yeah, he
and
was military.
so her mother would bring her here, and because that's where her roots are, and that's so she did. She was in my second grade. Actually, I should have graduated in 62. But you know, they held you back in those days. I was held back for a year. Miss Nye, not Miss Nye, but Miss Nye, and me and George Ronald and Thomas Lee and Judy Williams and a whole bunch of us. Half the class was held back that year.
It didn't hurt your.
No, it was good
it
for me.
didn't hurt you like you did. Nowadays, people are, oh my, it ruins your whole life with that.
No, actually, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me because I had another year of growth.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, and where I was an old 18-year-old, most of my contemporaries were young 17-year-olds. So
Yeah. You weren't in when you told about George Ronald a minute ago, but he was good friends with Bob Newcomb, you know, the other guy we were talking about, that had the high accent.
yeah,
But they used to do stuff to each other that was ungodly. I think one day I don't know, when George Ronald was taking a nap or something, and Newcomb came over. He lived in a trailer park across the road from there, and he somehow or another I think he had some lighter fluid, and he squirted it all over the covers and everything and lit it off. And George Ronald's there sleeping, you know. And of course he wakes up, and the bed was one of these beds that folds up into the wall.
oh, okay.
So he folded up into the wall with George Ronald on it.
Yeah, I guess I could elaborate on that a little bit, but is that on now?
Yeah.
Basically, I remember when it would rain real hard, the gutters would all fill up with water, and
You could lay down and
all-
flop in them if you wanted.
We would put in toy boats down there and have races. Me and Preston Lewis,
Yeah.
again, would do that a lot as well. So, and you know, what I remember the most is my grandmother, my great grandmother, not my grandmother, but and living with her, and she would close the parlor off in the winter, and we would live in pretty much the living room,
What was the
the
house?
dining room. Her husband's name?
No, the house that you lived in.
Okay, you know where Yule's store used to be now? They make cakes there, and
It's on the corner.
right on the
Yeah,
corner.
Yeah.
It was 2 houses up from there. And it was a big house too. It was, I don't know if it's still standing. Well, it isn't, as a matter of fact. Another one has been replaced it.
Yeah.
But it had 5 bedrooms. I think it was built originally for the people that worked on the railroad, didn't have a place to stay.
Yeah, the
So it was 5 bed, I guess so, yes. So originally it was built for them. And then my great-grandmother, or my great-grandfather, Rufus, they bought it. And I lived in that house with, let's see, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my mother, my Uncle Buddy, and my aunt. and we all lived there, and it was just,
Had a full house.
it was such a warm feeling. I don't know, I just felt really loved and cared for and stuff like that. So those are some of my fondest memories of Cape Charles. My nanny, that's what I called my great grandmother, was Nanny. And she always took me pretty much everywhere. But she was very strict. I had to go to church, that was a big thing. My mother was Catholic, so I had to go to Mass with her in the morning. And then she was a holiness, Pilgrim Holiness.
Oh,
is what
yeah.
she was. So I was I was indoctrinated with religion really good, and she was big on it too.
Yeah.
So,
The
but I'm
speaking
pretty
tongues,
much a
yeah.
heathen now.
Can you give the full names of your grandparents and your great grandparents?
Yes. Deena Moore was my great grandmother. S-M-O-O-R-E, Moore. Deenie, and I'm not sure how she spelled it. I think it was with two E's, D-E-E-N-A. I'm not sure though. And then her husband was Rufus. And their original roots are from Tangier Island. They came down here for employment purposes primarily, but Rufus had worked the water and he just wasn't doing well and he wanted a job. And he worked on the railroad until he died pretty young, actually, maybe in his 40s or something like that, of a massive heart attack. I go out to his grave all the time in spring and take flowers to her too, and his.
What year would you guess that they moved here? Had Rufus, or the waterman that came here to get a job at the railroad, what year would you guess he went to work for the railroad?
Well, I think Rufus and Deenie came down earlier than probably right at the turn of the century.
1886 is when all the railroad action
Right.
started, I think.
Okay.
Right at the turn of the
Early
century.
on.
And my grandfather, Stansbury Crockett, he came here after World War I.
Okay.
And he just didn't want to work on the water. He wanted a steady paycheck. And he's an interesting man too. He fought in the trenches of France and during World War I. And now my grandmother's name was Nellie Bennett. And her husband was Stansbury Crockett. They eventually got a divorce. But those are my mother's parents.
Nellie Barrett?
Nellie Bennett.
Bennett, sorry.
Bennett. It's a pretty typical name here, I'm sure.
B-N-N-E-T-T.
Right.
Yeah.
And Stansbury
Crockett
was from
Tangier.
Okay.
And he came here after World War I, probably around 1919, something like that. But I remember going into Wilson's store and those big train.
Oh, yeah,
they had
especially
set
at
up and that.
Christmas.
Those are very fond memories. And
Oh,
they'd always
yeah.
had Santa Claus come in. We knew he wasn't real.
It was hard to tell if you see the picture.
They on loafers, I figured, well, no, this isn't Santa Claus. I had that figured out long before most people, but my grandmother was telling me that was Santa Claus.
Any other like stores or businesses that you remember?
Well, yeah. As in high school, I remember Stanley Barban's store. What was that? Was it Adams or Jones's? I can't
Clothing
remember.
stores. Yeah, Jones's was.
And that was and there was Sax's store too.
Yeah.
My mother used to get school supplies there from there and stuff like that.
What did Stanley Barban store? What was?
Well, actually, his daughter still lives here. She's married to Butch Travis.
Yeah, Valerie.
Right, Valerie, right.
What kind of
my
store?
mother went to high school with him, Stanley Barban. And in fact, they dated for a while and stuff like that. He was in the same graduating class as George Savage and all those guys. So
Do you remember like what kind of store it was then? Or
yeah, it was a clothing store.
clothing. Okay.
Mostly men.
Okay.
By my flute.
Yeah, we rented our tuxedos to go to the prom from there. But,
Used to go to the Smith's Beach and get our bouquets there from some woman down there. You remember?
Oh,
that?
yeah, for the prom.
Welcome
You had to
to
go
the
get your
Christmas
flowers, you know.
Yes.
Any of the drugstores that you?
Well, Savage's was the place to go, and Griff's was, of course, the place to go as well. Plus Kenny's too, which
Yeah.
was right next door to the now library.
Yeah.
I used to go there for lunch sometimes. My mother just didn't feel like everybody pretty much went home for lunch because you could walk home,
Yeah.
and they didn't have a cafeteria at the school, so. The Savage's drugstore was a big place for kids to hang out. It was when you guys were here too, wasn't it?
Place to have sandwich.
And Griff's was as well. But,
And what was that third one you mentioned?
Kenny's.
Kenny's, okay.
Kenneth Horsley.
Yeah, and Peggy Horsley was in my class.
Yeah.
His daughter.
His son,
So.
yeah. And Peggy.
Peggy.
His sister, yeah.
Yeah. What was
I remember you
his
said somebody coming home.
But there was a 5 and dime store too. That was a
for Corey's.
big thing. You went in, every small town had one, but
Yeah.
and, you know, Palace Theater and the
Radium.
Radium. That was a big part of our social life in those
They
days.
had the Black Carver Theater back,
Correct.
in Joyzy.
What is that artist that he's from New England, but he does portraits of
Norman
small.
Rockwell?
It was a Norman Rockwell life. Right on. I mean, that's what it was like growing up here. It was a Norman Rockwell life.
Yeah, you're right. The scenes that he depicts in his paintings.
Exactly.
You
And
can
Bobby
identify
Rittenhouse
that.
and I used to talk about that. And going to Cape Charles High School was like going to a private school, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I lived all over, but I got a better education there than I did anywhere.
You got a lot of personal attention.
Exactly. Good and
Whether you
bad.
wanted it or not.
Well, even Miss Beatty, as much as I wasn't a mathematician, she took an interest in me and made sure I did my homework and stuff like that. So I learned how to study because I wasn't good in math.
Yeah.
Because I had to really study
Yeah.
hard to even just, get her
Yeah.
complimentary D.
Yeah, she's my favorite teacher. I have to say.
And they were all old-maid type school teachers too.
Yeah.
They were, like Pearl Smith and Miss Beatty, and
Yeah.
but they had a lot of respect for them. It was just a different scene all the way around. You wouldn't dare step out of line in Miss Beatty's class. Just, I'm glad I had the experience of growing up in such a unique place. What I remember is the beach and the harbor and Bud Field and
In school.
the hump and all that stuff. And there was baseball, semi-professional baseball team here. We used to go over, there was a grandstand there. And
Patton Field.
I feel very lucky that I had that experience. And I've carried those memories through my entire life. Wherever I go, I've brought a lot of friends from other places through town here on my other trips and stuff like that. And all of them fell in love with this town. I drove across country when I was in college with a fraternity brother, and we were going to go work in Connecticut that summer. And we spent about 5 days there with my grandmother. He said, "This is a great place, Tom." I said, "I know. I wanted you to see it,
I remember the time you were telling about you had to borrow $100, you ran out of gas or something on one of your cross country things, and you had to borrow $100 from your daddy, and you told him, he said, I'll pay you back, and he said, "You're damn right you will."
that was a different trip, but it was, when I was in college, I did a lot of crazy stuff. I look back and think, wow, it was crazy. But we decided, me and my roommate, that we were going to go to the Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And so we caught a flight to the Mardi Gras, but of course, we didn't have any money to get back. It was one way. We said, we'll hitchhike, and we just couldn't get a ride. And we spent, actually we went to Salvation Army, yeah. A cop picked us up hitchhiking, because we weren't supposed to be hitchhiking. And he said, "Well, you boys can't, it's illegal to hitchhike in town." And I said, "Well, what are we gonna do? We don't have any money, And he said, "Well, I can take you to the station. You can spend the night in jail, or you can go to Salvation Army, and they can give you some money to get a cheap motel." And it was a cheap motel too. But that was that trip. And eventually, Don, the guy that I went to the Mardi Gras with, he broke down and called his parents. I wasn't going to call my dad. There's no way in hell I was going to. You know, he said, you got yourself in this mess, you get yourself out. But there was also, it was final week too, so we had to get back and take our finals and stuff like that.
It's tough.
Well, Bobby Rittenhouse, I miss him. He was,
I became good friends with him when I would stay here.
yeah.
I'd stay out at his Rittenhouse Lodge.
Yeah.
And he and I talked politics. He was
Yeah,
totally
right.
different animal than I. He used to hate me. He called me a liberal pussy.
Yes. It all came to a level there of the taunt.
Exactly.
Strike up.
And I at the time I was a real, well, I still am. I was big on Obama. Okay, so I had Obama, you know, on my back bumper of my car. He said, "Obama, my ass." He said, I shouldn't let you stay here. He said, but we would argue, and then we'd have a beer together and stuff like that. So
he
it's
let you keep your dog there, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah. He was real good about that, you know. So.
Yeah. I
And
enjoyed.
I'd go down to his house, his apartment that he
Yeah.
had there,
Yeah.
and he'd always offer me a drink or something, and we'd sit there and shoot the bull. We'd talk politics, and he got mad at me really bad one time. Something I said, I can't even remember what it was, but I guess it was Bill O'Reilly was doing a thing, interviewing Obama, and he wanted O'Reilly to just crucify Obama, and O'Reilly was a gentleman and didn't do it, so I was glad.
I got puffed up about that.
You know, his wife died when Bobby was just
Yeah.
like in 28 years old, and they had 2 kids,
Yeah.
and he raised those 2 kids by himself.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so.
Yeah.
But that's another story in itself too. He was in the same graduating class as my mother, George Savage.
Really?
Yeah, George Savage. Who else? Oh, Stanley Barban and all that whole crew. You know.
Yeah.
So
He had some neat experiences. Did he ever tell you when he met Queen Elizabeth?
a what?
When he met Queen Elizabeth, did he ever tell you?
Yes, he did in Williamsburg, at
Yeah,
William and Mary
yeah.
College.
Met her several times, I think. They kept moving from one room to another.
Right.
And
He said, "I've met the Queen of England." He says, "I've led a charmed life." He said.